one of the things you see in kind of Islamic modernists or kind of progressive Muslims is, let's just say, a significantly reduced level of humility, a certainty about their moral or scientific view of the world. And not being willing to say, like, you know what, maybe God and the Prophet know better than us on something. That's, I think, what's really at issue. So in some ways, these debates, although they might be about Abu Hurairah or about, whether we believe hadith or not, that's not really what the debate is. The debate is, how willing are we to subordinate what people around us are saying are the certainties, the moral certainties, the political certainties, whatever, scientific certainties of our world. How willing are we saying these are more powerful than the message of God and his prophet? That's what we're saying. That's the debate, right?
Yes.
Or are we saying that if we're going to be Muslim, it can only be an Islam that is really defined by, let's say, progressive sensibilities?
Dr. Jonathan Brown, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to the Thinking Muslim podcast.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Well, it's great to have you with us. Dr. Brown, Muslims around the world hold with immense respect the hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. These are his recorded words, his actions, and his silence on an issue. Today, Dr. Brown, I want to explore in some depth, the hadith, its formulation, how we know they actually reflect the traditions of the Prophet ﷺ, its value in comparison to the Quran, the Sunnah as a source of Shariah, and some of the common misunderstandings and arguments by some, maybe the orientalists and the modernists, who propose arguments against adopting the hadith as a source of Shariah. Now let's start with a definition of what the hadith are. How would you define the hadith and its value from an Islamic standpoint?
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So it's a big topic. But I'm happy to, this is the Thinking Muslim podcast.
Yes.
So we have some time.
We do have time. You've got a talk in 2.5 hours time to give.
Yeah, and I have nothing else to do in the minute. I'll talk until you collapse. It'll collapse. I'll just bring you some kind of adrenaline shots or something.
Inshallah.
So so hadiths are this question is actually the sub question of an initial question, but I'll answer the sub question first. So the second question. So hadiths are reports about something, as you said, that the Prophet ﷺ said or did, or things that were done in his presence and to which he did not object, right? So the idea is if something were done in his presence, he doesn't object to it, it means that it's allowed to do. For example, certain kinds of birth control, which I won't get into because audiences tend to be a bit squeamish, which is actually very un-Muslim, right?
Yes.
Muslim scholars are always very happy to talk about even the most intimate bodily things, but certain types of birth control were being done in his time, and he never said he never said do this, it's okay, but he never objected to it.
Right.
Then we know that this is permissible, right? So each hadith consists of two parts. It consists of the text of the hadith, which is called the matan. And then there's the chain of transmission by which the hadith arrived at some collector or maybe multiple collectors who write this down and put it in a compilation. I mean, technically, hadiths have their isnad, their chain of transmission, all the way to us today. So, I mean, today, for example, there's people, you can narrate hadiths via contiguous isnads back to the Prophet. The shortest ones would be probably like 15 to 20 change of transmitters.
Right.
Back to the Prophet ﷺ. By all through extremely long-lived people. So we're being very selective about that, right?
Yeah.
So people who are extremely long-lived.
Right.
Now, the question of what is hadith is actually, a lot of times what people mean by that is, what is the sunnah of the Prophet?
Yes.
So the sunnah of the Prophet, sunnah in pre-Islamic Arabia is just the way of the people. So there's like pre-Islamic verses of poetry that talk about you know, لِكُلِّ قَوْمٍ سُنَّتُهَا وَإِمَامُهَا, right? So every tribe, every people has their own sunnah and their own imam, their own leader. So it's like the way, if you think of the Mandalorian TV show, and they say like, this is the way. The sunnah is the way of the Prophet,
right?
Right. The actual kind of technical definitions for sunnah,
yes,
you could find, for example, the famous Indian scholar Shah Wali Allah, who died in 1762, Common Era. He talks about the sunnah as the infallible application of the book of God, right? So the Quran, the sunnah is the Quran applied by an infallible interpreter, namely the messenger of God. Another way to think about the sunnah, which is also correct, right, is to say that it's the normative precedent of the Prophet Muhammad. So why do I say normative precedent? So normative meaning that it has kind of moral force. It has authority over us. It commands us. Because there's other aspects of the Prophet's precedent that are not normative. For example, you know, you're Muslim, I'm Muslim, but you're wearing basically what originated as an Ottoman hunting jacket. This is what the sport coat is. Can you believe that? This is like, you know, in your Worcester and Jeeves, this is the stuff they wear when they're like biking and going hunting. This is their sports clothing when they're playing like cricket. Now this is formal clothing.
What gives it away? What makes this an Ottoman hunting
jacket? This is what we're both wearing.
Really?
This actual design, like a jacket that we wear is originated in the 1700s as Ottoman hunting jacket. Yeah, as far as I know. Oh. And then you're wearing this like cotton thing.
Yes, a shirt.
Buttons, right?
Yes.
And then you've got these things on your eyes, which I dig. It's sort of a Buddy Holly style, right?
A Malcolm X.
Yeah, Malcolm. Okay, well, wait, scratch the Buddy Holly. But so that you know, and I'm Muslim.
Yes.
And yet neither of us are wearing what the Prophet used to wear.
Right.
What did the Prophet used to wear? Do you know?
Yeah, that's a debatable issue. It depends who you speak to, I think. But I don't.
We don't even know. I mean, there is an answer, but like we don't even know. I mean, if we regular Muslim wouldn't even know the answer because it was decided very early on in the Muslim community during the time of the companions of the Prophet that dress is not normative, right? So as long as our auras are covered,
yes,
and as long as we're dressed like, you know, for example, technically, I could do this podcast with no shirt on. I could do this podcast topless, and my aura would be covered.
Yes,
but that would be just disgraceful.
Yes.
Plus, everyone in the audience would feel bad about themselves.
Yes,
but that's a pretty good joke. So then the point is, it was decided very early on in the Muslim community that as long as you're within the kind of outer limits of what the Shariah rules are. For example, we're not wearing silk. Yeah. Men can't wear silk, right?
Of course, yes.
But other than that, our dress, we don't follow how the Prophet dressed.
You're right.
And it's interesting. So you can see in like some of the early Muslim, like Sunni theological texts, you'll have, you know, we believe in angels, we believe in messengers, we believe in fate, we believe in, you know, things like this. And then you say, we believe in the permissibility of wearing pants. Why is that in a theological text, right? Because that's actually an important statement about your epistemology, like about how you derive your norms and your kind of the law of in your faith, right? Which is to say, wearing pants and wearing clothes that the Prophet did not wear. He didn't wear pants, right? Is acceptable. We're not. His dress is not normative for us. Now, if you and I decided to imitate the Prophet, because the Quran says the Prophet is uswatun hasana, right? He's a goodly example. So let's say we're going to dress exactly like the Prophet. We're going to sleep on our right sides, facing the Kaaba. We're going to break our fasts on dates and water. We're going to follow the Prophet's life in as many ways as we can, and including dressing like him. Then, you know, God would, in theory, reward us because we're emulating the Prophet. Right. We could do that, but it's not required. Right? It's not even necessarily recommended. Okay. So the Sunnah is the normative precedent of the Messenger of God.
Yes.
Now, one of the central issues, one of the central kind of engines driving Islamic intellectual tradition, is the relationship between the Quran and the Sunnah.
Yes.
Right. this always surprises students when I tell them this, but it actually shouldn't surprise students, and it wouldn't surprise Muslim scholars, including the earliest Muslim scholars. It would not surprise them. But I ask my students, I say, what is more powerful, the Quran or the Sunnah of the Prophet? What do you think?
Well, one of my questions is, do we regard both to be of equal precedence, equal power?
But you're asking a question.
Right.
You have to answer the question.
Well, I'm going to go with we regard them to be of equal weight.
Okay, that's a safe answer.
Yes.
I've actually never heard someone give that answer. You're very very cautious. That's good. That's good.
We're in Britain. We're cautious people.
So normally you ask Muslims, they say, well, obviously the Quran.
Yes.
Especially if they're kind of like, maybe they're a little bit on the liberal side. Not that there's anything wrong. Not that there's anything wrong with that, right? They definitely say the Quran.
Yes.
I don't deal with these hadiths, right?
Yes.
So, but when you go back and again look in the earliest texts we have in the Islamic tradition, the earliest texts we have,
yes,
you see figures like Az-Zuhri. He died 124 Hijri, 742 Common Era. Yahya bin Abi Kathir, I think he died 127 Hijri. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Al-Awza'i, who died about 773 Common Era. Abdurrahman al-Awza'i, great scholar who died in Beirut. You can see his grave in Beirut if you go today. You'll see this quote, which is, the book, the Quran, did not come to rule over the Sunnah. The Sunnah came to rule over the Quran.
Okay.
ما جاء الكتاب قاضيا على السنة إنما جاءت السنة قاضية على الكتاب.
Right.
And you also see sayings like this: the Quran needs the Sunnah more than the Sunnah needs the Quran. Yeah, I tell this to students. They're like, "Oh, what is this?" Yes. They're like throwing their papers up in the air, like, "Astaghfirullah, what are you talking about?" Yeah. I say, students, relax. Look, there's no debate ontologically from the perspective of like being. The Quran is obviously prior to and superior to the Sunnah of the Prophet. Like the Quran is the Word of God.
Yes.
The Sunnah of the Prophet is the word and the actions of human being. Even if it's an inspired human being, it's still a human being, right?
Yeah.
If it weren't for the Quran, if it weren't for the revelation, there would be no prophecy, right? So, prophecy is a product of God intervening in history. So if it weren't for that divine intervention, you don't have prophecy. So the Quran is sort of ontologically prior to and superior to the Sunnah of the Prophet. But hermeneutically, right? Hermeneutics is the kind of study of interpretation, the study of understanding. Hermeneutically, the Sunnah of the Prophet is more powerful than the Quran.
Really?
Right. And this is actually, it's interesting because, I don't like to, kind of dump on Western scholarship, but in the kind of 20th century, a group of Western literary scholars realized that the real power in a text lies not in the author, but in the interpreter. Muslims understood this, at the very beginning of the Islamic tradition, right? Which is the interpreter has the power.
Right.
Imagine this. There's like you're out on the street here and there's a window and there's maybe something beautiful inside here. Yeah. Let's say this is England, so there's a Christmas tree. It's Christmas time, there's Christmas trees, and you're outside. It's like very Dickensian. You're looking in, you got like the gloves with no fingers on them. Yeah. You got the weird hat. Okay, and you're looking in, and the window is distorted. The window is, so what are you seeing? Like what controls what you're seeing? You don't even actually know what's inside. You only know what's coming through the window, right? So if the window distorts what you're seeing or changes what it is or even gives a whole new image, that's what you see.
Right.
The window is holding the power. That the lens through which you see is actually controlling the whole process. So in a system where you interpret an interpretive tradition, like let's say the American legal tradition. What is the meaning of the Constitution, for example? It doesn't matter what the Constitution says. You don't even need to read the Constitution because what matters is the interpretation of the Supreme Court.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter what the previous interpretations of the Supreme Court are. What matters is the most recent interpretation of the Supreme Court. They define what that means.
Right.
Right. So in an interpretive system, you think of it like an onion.
Yeah.
The core of the onion is, of course, the heart of the onion, but it's the outer layers through which we perceive that core. So Muslim scholars, and all Muslim scholars agreed with this, Sunni, Shia, even like, Ismaili, for example, scholars think this. All of them have always read the Quran through the Sunnah of the Prophet. You read the Quran through the Sunnah of the Prophet.
Yes.
Right? The Sunnah of the Prophet explains the Quran. So the Quran tells us to pray. The Quran doesn't say how to pray. The Quran doesn't explicitly say when to pray. The Quran doesn't tell us what to do if we make a mistake in our prayer. The Quran doesn't tell us what to do, when it's Friday prayer, right? Jummah prayer. So these things all are explained in the Quran.
Right.
Sorry, in the Sunnah of the Prophet.
Yes.
The Sunnah of the Prophet adds to the Quran. So like my kids the other day, they were saying, I don't know why, they're like, can we eat lion meat? They're like, we want to, I don't know what we said. We were like looking at something, and it was a guy who like just travels and eats weird foods in places. And he's like, he went to some country and he's like, they got this lion meat hamburger. And my kids are like, oh, I want the lion meat hamburger.
Yeah.
So I was like, I can't eat that.
Yes.
Although apparently some Muslim scholars say you can. But anyway, in general, why? The Quran doesn't say don't eat lion meat. Right? The Quran says blood is prohibited, carrion is prohibited, pork is prohibited. But animals with canines are prohibited too, carnivores, because the Prophet naha an kulli dhi anyab, right? So anything that has canines, also prohibited.
Yes. Adds
to the Quran. Very importantly, the Sunnah specifies the Quran.
Right.
Specifies it, restricts it. So, and this is where I find, again, I got nothing but love for all my Muslim brothers and sisters. But sometimes people will come and say, Yahi, I don't want to deal with hadiths. Don't tell me the Sunnah of the Prophet. Oh, look, I just follow the Quran. I'll be like, oh, really? So do you think, like, let's say I steal this pen from, is this a pen? This is extremely heavy.
It's a stylus for...
Like it's a computer pen. Yes. Okay. So let's say I steal this computer pen. Well, let's pretend it's a regular pen, okay? From this table.
Yeah.
Quranically, what's the punishment for me? The punishment is I get my hand chopped off, right? Right? I get my hand chopped off for stealing this. Let's not, in this stylus, these things can be kind of expensive. Let's pretend this is just some cheap pen you get in a hotel. According to the Quran alone, I get my hand chopped off.
Yes.
The Sunnah of the Prophet restricts it. So from the Prophet's hadith, we know, for example, that the item has to be above a certain value. It's below a certain value, you're not going to get your hand chopped off. You're just going to get, you have to return the item. You get yelled at. You get smacked a bunch of times with a paddle. You get put in prison. Whatever the punishments that we've decided on are. Okay. Then let's say, we're here in the studio. Let's say this is like an extremely expensive computer stylus, yes. Right? So this is like $1,000. That's above the limit. I steal it. We know from the Sunnah of the Prophet, from the Hadith in the Prophet and the Sunnah of Abu Dawood and other collections, that the item has to be in what's called the hirz. Hirz means a secure location. So you left it out on the table. If I take this, I've committed a crime. I get dragged into court. You're going to say, this guy stole my stylus. I'm going to get smacked or put in prison or whatever the punishment that is just determined in what's called ta'zir punishment. Right. But I'm not going to get my hand chopped off. So it has to be in a secure location. But let's say you have this like kind of locked drawer here. You put the stylus in there.
Yeah.
But I'm really intent on getting this thing. So I come in, no one's here. You got like a little mask on and everything. I jimmy open the drawer and I take the stylus.
Yeah.
I get caught. Take me into the court. They perp walk me into the court. You're there. It's like, look, now, okay, definitely he's going to get his hand chopped off, right? No, because from the companion, and this is important, I'm going to get into this in a second. The companions of the Prophet, in their application, like by Umar ibn al-Khattab during his caliphate and other companions of the Prophet who were acting as judges in the early Islamic period, we know that they would do this. They would say, are you sure you stole this? Like, did you think this was yours? Yes, I thought it was mine. I don't have to give any evidence. I just say, yes, I thought it was mine. No one's going to get their hand chopped off. I'm going to get punished again. I get smacked a bunch of times with a reed. I get, put in prison, whatever the different punishment, whatever's been determined according to ta'zir punishment. Sure. In fact, in Islamic law, in theory and in practice, the only way to get your hand chopped off if you steal something is if you say, like, I want my hand to be chopped off. Otherwise, it almost never happens. And this is not, Jonathan Brown giving some rosy version of Islamic law or something. This is, you can find non-Muslim scholars writing about this, like Ruud Peters in his book on Islamic criminal law. He says it's essentially impossible to get your hand chopped off unless you actually want that to happen. So then this is a little bit of a detour, but people ask me, well, why does the Quran have this rule then?
Yeah.
For the same reason that, do you know, okay, I love this. We're in Britain. I can use this example here. Okay.
Yes.
In Britain, in the year 1800, do you know how many death penalty offenses there were?
I don't.
Over 200 death penalty offenses. Things like stealing someone's shoe buckles, stealing firewood, going to like someone's pond and taking fish out of their pond. Death penalty offenses. Okay, were people actually put to death for these? No.
I would imagine no.
No. What happens? Here's the question. When was the Metropolitan Police Force? When was the first police force in England founded?
See, you're going to, better than I do.
I should stop asking you these questions. You're just going to, they're going to, okay, so actually, I know you know the answer to this, but you're playing along. That's good. You're playing along. You're letting me.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
yes.
So 1830. By the end of the 19th century, so by 1900, how many death penalty offenses are there in Britain? 4.
Wow, really?
4. So you go from 200 to 4 in a century. What changes? Police force is founded, railways, modern bureaucracies, salaried, administration. Essentially, modernization occurs. It's very common in pre-modern legal systems to have extremely severe punishments, but then not actually have those punishments carried out. Why? There's no police force. There's no like inspector who comes and says, I'm going to do it again. Well, what have we here, right? There's nobody who comes, there's no one who's going to come to your house and investigate something.
Yes.
There's no guy walking around with like twirling his baton.
Yes.
Okay. There's no investigative policing. There's no preventative policing. And that's in the cities. Then forget about like going outside of the cities. There's nothing. So what the law does is it can only just strike fear into people's heart. Tell people this is really serious. But then they don't actually want people getting killed for stealing firewood, right?
Yes.
But the idea is you kind of scare the population into this. And then if someone actually gets caught, there's always, and this is the same thing in the British legal system in the assizes, which is they would always find a way out for the suspect or the convict.
Yes.
So the same thing in the Islamic legal tradition, because the Prophet says, alayhi salam, find a way out, ward off the hudud punishments from the believers as much as possible. If you find a way out for the person, use it. It's better to err in mercy than to err in severity. So this is, everything I've told you is from the Sunnah of the Prophet, both in the form of hadiths and in the form of the companions' practice, and then the legal tradition after them. Yes. So the Sunnah explains the Quran, it adds to the Quran, it restricts the Quran.
Right.
Now, someone might say, I mean, fine, Professor Brown, but like the Quran says, it's tibyanun li kulli shay. The Quran says this is a clarification of all things.
Yes.
The Quran says, what is it? Ma farratna min al-kitabi min shay, I think is the verse, I'm not mistaken. So God says, we have not omitted anything from this book.
Yes.
But Professor Brown, you just told me all this stuff that's not in the Quran.
Yeah.
So the Quran seems to be contradicting itself. The answer to this is, and this gets to your kind of original question, the Quran authorizes the Sunnah.
So in that sense, is the Sunnah revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
The Sunnah is a type of revelation. So it depends, right? So if you say, technically speaking, the Quran is kalam Allah. So the wording and the content, the meaning and the wording is divine. The Sunnah, the meaning is inspired by God. The wording is prophetic, is from a human being, right? But the Quran says, for example, that we sent down the kitab, al-kitaba wal-hikmah, the book and the wisdom. The Quran says, what is it? وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ ذِكْرَ لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِلَ عَلَيْهِمْ, right? We sent down to you, Muhammad, the dhikr, the remembrance, the kind of the saying, that you might clarify to people what was revealed to them.
Right.
So the Quran is saying, we gave you, Muhammad, wisdom, teaching, knowledge with which you can clarify this message. So the Quran, it's as if I say, for example, to let's say I tell, like my older kid, I say, hey, I tell the younger kid, I say, listen, I'm leaving, I'm going upstairs, whatever. I'm going to go listen to a podcast and clean the bathroom or something. I don't want to be disturbed. You listen to your older brother. Now, when that older brother tells him to do something, he's actually, and the younger kid listens to him, which in theory he's going to do, but actually not going to do, right? He's actually obeying me. So I've deputized, I've sort of authorized the older kid.
Right.
So it's the same thing.
Yes.
So the Sunnah is, now it's interesting because there's a hadith in Sunnah of Abu Dawood, which is actually not a super reliable hadith, I don't think, but it's I think it represents this idea pretty well, which is that the Prophet says, Inni utitu al-kitab wa mithluhu ma'ahu, right? I was given the book and its likes with it. So I was given the book and the Sunnah along with it. And also, you see Muslim scholars refer to the Prophet ﷺ as Sahib al-Wahyain, the kind of holder of two revelations, the revelation of the Quran, the revelation of the Sunnah of the Prophet. Can I keep talking?
Yes, you can, please.
Okay, because I'm going to just...
Well, I have got a question.
Yeah.
We often, in common language, we often use the word sunnah to mean the prayer, the 2 rakah after Maghrib, for example, or the 2 rakah before Fajr or something like this, right? We have got Sunnah as a source of Shariah, which you're describing, the Hadith as a source of Shariah. And then we've got Sunnah as a rule of action or as a Hukm Shari'i, I suppose, right? What's the connection between the two?
This is, in a way, this is just kind of coincidental,
Really?
What is it? Homophones, or what is that? I hear the word.
Yes.
Yeah. So, it's actually more helpful just not to use the word sunnah for it. So there's what's called the ahkam al-taklifiyya,
right,
which are like the normative grades.
Yes.
So wajib, required, sunnah or mandub, which is recommended,
yes,
mubah, permissible, makruh, disliked, haram, forbidden, right?
Yes.
So in this is just for our cases, distraction, right?
Really?
Which is people tend to say, and you often find Muslim scholars talking about something being sunnah or sunnah mu'akkada, like,
Hanafis,
verified sunnah or less verified sunnah,
Yeah.
to things that are not required or maybe not epistemologically as strong as other types of rulings, but have this name. But that's just a for our purposes, it's a distraction.
So just to clarify, you can, for example, so if we call it mandub, let's use that term, an action that is mandub can actually come from Quran.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it can come from the Quran. It can come from from qiyas, from an analogical reasoning. It can come from lots of things. So, in fact, that's kind of in the Hanafi school what defines what's called sunnah mu'akkada or wajib as opposed to fardh. Is wajib and fardh are both requirements.
Yes.
But it's where they come from in like the kind of epistemological backing. Something that's Quranic is fardh. Something that's from the sunnah is wajib, right?
Yeah. So on that, do the Hanafis then regard the wajib? I know it's a distraction from the original, but it just for my understanding, do they regard the wajib to be of a lesser obligation to that of the fardh?
As far as I understand it, and I'm talking to I'm in Britain, and I probably have like 5 different Maulanas walking around outside who could potentially answer this. But as far as I understand it, and you can always like a little correction note in here if you want, which is, I think they're equally binding. They're equally normative. It's a question of what underlies that normativity in terms of the source.
Yes.
Okay, now you said something which I think is an important point to move on to, which is, you said we have the Sunnah, the Hadith. So you're kind of treating them as synonymous.
Yes.
But they're not synonymous. Okay, they're not synonymous. It's very important. They're very different things. Hadith are a way of knowing about the Sunnah.
Okay.
Remember, the Sunnah is the normative precedent of the Prophet Muhammad. Right? The Sunnah is the lens through which we read and understand the Quran. Okay. One way to know about the Sunnah is reports about things the Prophet said, things he did, and things that were done in his presence to which he did not object. That's Hadith. That's one way to know about it. That's not the only way to know about it. This is my own breakdown. I think it's totally correct, but it's not. I'm not, channeling some earlier Muslims. There's Jonathan Brown's list. Okay, you can call it as such. You could think of like 4 different ways of knowing what the Sunnah of the Prophet is. Okay. So the first one is Hadiths. Right. Now, each of these ways is legitimate. In fact, every school of law, every school of theology in Islamic tradition uses all of these 4. One of the reasons you see, let's say, the Maliki school differ from the Hanafi school is because of which one they emphasize more, or which one they lean on in a particular circumstance versus another source. They're all legitimate. They're all used by every school of law and theology. Each of these ways of knowing about the Sunnah has its strengths, and each has its drawbacks. So one way is Hadiths. Okay, I want to know what the Sunnah of the Prophet was. So I go and I collect as many reports as I can, and let's assume they're all authentic, right?
Yes.
But now, what do I have to do? I have to figure out how they relate to one another. What if he says, for example, you find an authentic hadith where the Prophet said, where Muslims say that we used to, during the time of the Prophet, do wudu after we ate cooked food. Do you ever do wudu after you eat cooked food?
No.
Okay, you don't. But this is a sound hadith. Why aren't you following the Sunnah of the Prophet? Because it's then explained that then the Prophet changed this and would eat food, cooked food, and not do wudu. So we knew that we didn't have to do this anymore. So that's what's called naskh or abrogation. So this hadith is mansukh. It's abrogated.
Right.
But you have to figure out, okay, here's this hadith, and you have to put them together, figure out. Sometimes the Prophet will say, alayhi salam, I used to tell you to do this, but now do this. Okay, that's easy.
Okay.
Then sometimes you might have something that the Prophet says that's general for everybody, or maybe it's specific for a certain person. You have to figure out how these relate to one another. The Prophet, alayhi salam, oftentimes, like any leader of a big community or politician, he doesn't go out and speak like a lawyer. He doesn't say, regarding point 3A, stipulating, everyone would fall asleep. He goes out and he's, speaking these kind of in a hyperbolic language, a grand language, especially pre-Islamic Arabia is a culture of hyperbole.
Yes.
Like these pre-Islamic poets, they're not saying like, I'm pretty generous. I'm decently generous. It's like, I'm the most generous person. I slaughtered all the camels of my tribe to feed the guests who came. Even today, one could argue that Arab culture is a little bit hyperbolic. You go to like Arab person's house, they don't say like, please eat. No, I think you should eat some food. They say like, no, I will not accept you leaving without eating all the food. Okay. I'm married to Arab, by the way, so just to make it clear.
Yes.
So sometimes you have hadiths. For example, like the Prophet will say, قاتل الله اليهود حرم عليهم الشحوم فأذابها وأكلوا الثمن. Right? So a Sahih hadith where the Prophet says, may God fight the Jews. It was prohibited them to eat the fat of animals, certain animals, but then they melted the fat to oil, and they sold the oil, and then they took the money. Right? So he's being critical of this like legal ruse. Right? Now I'm going to say, oh my God, like look at this, like God, may God fight the Jews. Like, oh, I knew it. I knew the Muslims had this problem. But you have to understand how Arabic language, this phrase, and this is not Jonathan Brown trying to do some like kinder, gentler version of Islam. This is pre-modern Muslim scholars all write about this. They say, what does may God fight somebody? This is just, I disapprove of this. It's like, this is something I disapprove of, right? He's not punishing anybody for doing this. He's just saying, I disapprove of this. Yeah. So they have to take the language and the culture of how people speak at the time into consideration, fitting all these things together. Yeah. So the strength of this approach of using hadiths to know the Sunnah of the Prophet is that you have a lot of details. It's a really fine-grained picture. But the challenge is how you fit these puzzle pieces together. Yes. Why do you have different schools of law and theology in Islam? Sometimes because they fit the pieces together differently. Second way of knowing the Sunnah of the Prophet is legal interpretation. Right? So Muslims, like the companions of the Prophet, they, especially the senior ones. For example, there's very few hadiths narrated from like Omar compared to other, or like Ali or Uthman. There's not many hadiths from them. Most of the hadiths come from younger companions. Ibn Abbas, Ibn Omar, Anas bin Malik, Aisha, Abu Hurairah, people who knew the Prophet only for a relatively limited time. Right. For them, they're going around and collecting all these reports from other companions. They want to hear. For example, you very rarely hear Abu Hurairah say, I heard the Prophet say. He says the Prophet said something. He's getting it from another companion. Right. He's going and collecting this from other people and writing down in notebooks as material. The senior companions don't quote the Prophet very much, alayhi salam, because the Sunnah for them is something that was like imprinted on their personalities. Right. It's like when you, let's say you're like a doctor or something, right? So you apprentice with another doctor, and you might not remember things this doctor said, but like you kind of follow them around, and they just sort of, you kind of model yourself after them, and their way of doing things sort of imprints itself on you and your conduct. That's the way the senior companions preserve the Sunnah. And then they teach their senior students, and they teach their senior students, and they teach all the way up to the present day. So the Sunnah of the Prophet is a way of thinking, a way of problem solving. So you see this as a very important way of preserving the Sunnah. Yes. What's the strength? You really get like kind of a spirit of the law. How do you deal with things in new situations when you come across people wearing pants, for example, instead of thobes or robes? What's the drawback? Sometimes the spirit of the law can lead you away from the letter of the law, and you start to kind of maybe get too far out in your reasoning. The third way of knowing the Sunnah of the Prophet, very important, practice of a pious community. Okay. How do Muslims act? So, you probably learn to pray. You didn't learn to pray by reading hadiths. You probably learned to pray from your parents and by going to the mosque, and you see how other people pray. How do you know how to act in a mosque? How do you know that, you're not supposed to walk right in front of somebody? Like when I became Muslim, no one ever told me like, don't walk in front of somebody when you're praying. You just see people doing this, and you kind of absorb this just from communal practice. Yes. It's a very important way of preserving the Sunnah of the Prophet. Finally, the last way is, clear maxims and rules, like the Prophet saying, al-bayyin ala al-mudda'i wal-yamin ala man ankar. So the person making a claim has to provide evidence. The person whose the claim is made upon, if the person making the claim doesn't have any evidence, the person whose the claim is being made on just says, I swear I didn't do this or whatever. So if I say, for example, you broke my stereo, you broke my car. Right. You owe me money or something. I can't just say it. I have to provide evidence. If I don't provide evidence, you're innocent. So you could think of this as like innocent until proven guilty, right? Or not liable until proven liable. Yes. So this is it happens to be a hadith, but this is a very clear maxim that ends up governing lots of Islamic law. So these are 4 ways of knowing the Sunnah. Yeah. They're all valid. They're all important. Different schools would draw on them in different ways. So let's talk about the hadith collections. I mean, commonly we know that in Sunni tradition, there are 6 books of hadith collections. Imam Bukhari was alive some 200 years after the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And so in between the first 200 years, did we have any scholars that
did equal work that put together collections of hadith like these Imams of the 6 books, or was that the first attempt to build these collections? And I suppose my secondary question is why? Why did Imam Bukhari or Muslim or Abu Dawud see it necessary to compile hadith and to verify hadith into these collections of Sahih collections of books?
Okay, so a lot of questions
Many
there.
questions, yes.
Okay, so the first thing to remember is it's very hard to, so there's no written tradition in like Western Northern Arabia.
Right.
There are alphabets. There's an alphabet in Yemen. They write temple inscriptions in ancient South Arabian languages, stuff like that. But there's no like, there's no, Herodotus's history being written in Yemen or in the Hijaz. Like what becomes the Arabic alphabet is actually kind of developed and finalized to write the Quran. So there's not even really a complete alphabet.
Really?
People don't write stuff down, or they write very simplistic stuff down, like shopping lists.
Yeah.
Or like, I have I'm giving you 5 bags of grain, you're giving me 3 bags of dates, and write this down. Very simple write. Yeah. There's no written tradition or literary tradition. So like as I said, the writing the Quran is like this, unprecedented act in Northern and Western Arabia. It's like this, something that Muslims develop an alphabet to do. One of the reasons they didn't write down stuff is that it's not very easy writing material. Now we have paper, okay? It's cheap, it's easy. But paper didn't enter the Muslim world until around 790, the Common Era, from China. So before that, or in the Roman world, like Romans don't write stuff down either. For daily stuff, they write on wax tablets. And they write all the stuff they put in stone. They're not going to chip stuff into stone easily. There's papyrus. Papyrus is very expensive. It's only grown in Egypt.
Right.
There's parchment, which is treated animal skin. This is developed in Bergama in what's today Turkey as an alternative to papyrus. It's also very expensive. How many animal skins are you going to buy? So this is a very expensive material. You can't just sort of write down random stuff on it. So there are companions of the Prophet who know how to write. Most of these were either previously Jews in Medina, or they were polytheist Arabs like Zayd ibn Thabit, who were raised by who went into the Jewish schools in Medina.
Right.
So he knows how to write Hebrew. He knows how to write Aramaic. He knows how to write this early Arabic. So what they're writing stuff down on, whether it's a Quranic verses or early just collections of things they hear the Prophet say, alayhi salam, they're writing on, really simplistic stuff. They're writing on pottery pieces. They're writing on camel shoulder bones. They're writing on the palm scratching onto like sticks, the outside of sticks, parchment. It's very expensive, okay? Very cumbersome. So some of the companions of the Prophet, like Abu Hurairah, like Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, start to collect some of these early written sources about hadiths. We're not talking about the Quran anymore. We're just talking about writing down hadiths.
Right.
And these are put down into things that are called sahifas. Sahifa basically means page.
Right.
And this might be papyrus, it might be parchment, it might be like scratched into, I don't know if you see like palm trees, and if they're not manicured, they kind of grow these like sheaths that come out of them that are really fibrous and thin. Okay. You rip them off and you can cut them into like sections, you can scratch stuff into it, right? So that kind of thing. It's very cumbersome. Now, what you see is these are called sahifas, and they're passed down usually from in a family. So the Sahifa of Amr bin Shu'aib, for example, comes from his grandfather, from Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, the companion of the Prophet, the son of Amr ibn al-As.
Yeah.
So, or there are other sahifas as well that are famous. Hammam ibn Munabbih, who died in 732 Common Era, writes down a bunch of hadiths from Abu Hurairah. That's a famous sahifa. Now, these are passed on in the families, and then they're copied by students who want to get this material. So now we've gone from like the companions of the Prophet. The last companion of the Prophet, the last major one who dies is Anas ibn Malik, who dies in 93 Hijri in Basra. So 93 Hijri is like, I don't know, 713. I'm just guessing, right? Around that time. The successors, among the successors, there are people like Az-Zuhri, Sa'id bin Abi Uruba, who they're collecting hadith orally, because, that's how people are transmitting a lot of this stuff. It's just, for example, if I ask you, did you go to that talk by Jonathan Brown? Did he say anything interesting in the talk? Yeah, he said, somebody said he looked like Harrison Ford today, which actually happened.
Really?
And the person was not homeless asking for money. It was actually an intelligent person. So I was really complicated. Although they didn't say what age Harrison Ford they're talking about. So it might be like very old Harrison Ford. Anyway, so the point is, so you could say that. I mean, you're not going to like write this down.
Yeah.
But if suddenly everyone becomes obsessed with Jonathan Brown and what he says, you could say, I remember one time Jonathan Brown said this. Right. And someone writes that down. Even though this for you was oral. So then, the time of the kind of the early 700s, the younger people who met the companions of the Prophet, they start to write down, collect and write down this material, gather existing written material into notebooks. Sometimes these are papyrus scrolls or parchment. And then the next generation, so I mentioned a scholar, Muhammad ibn Shihab al-Zuhri, who died in 748 of the Common Era. 742 of the Common Era. I'm sorry, 742.
Right.
So his student, one of his students, is Malik ibn Anas, big scholar in Medina. So Malik ibn Anas meets people who are successors to the companions of the Prophet. So he meets people from the second generation of the Muslims, a lot of people from the third generation, all the great scholars of Medina. And he's starting to also write down, what are they saying? What are the hadiths they're transmitting? What are the rulings of Omar bin al-Khattab? What are the rulings of Aisha? What are the rulings of Ibn Abbas? Writing all this stuff down and then starting to organize it. And now you have the first like actual book. An example, in the time of Malik, so the mid to late 700s, books like the Muwatta of Malik, books like the Muwatta of, same title, means the well-trodden path of Ibn Majashun, right? Ibn Abi Dhi'b or something. And, or the Jami' of Ma'mar bin Rashid. He died at 153 Hijri. So, and there's actually a manuscript, partial manuscript I think it's in Spain, dated in 974 of the Common Era. So that was when that copy was written of the collection. Jami' means like just collection of Ma'mar bin Rashid, who comes from Basra originally. He goes to Yemen, settles in Yemen. So his compilation that was transmitted from him by his student, Abd al-Razzaq San'ani. Abd al-Razzaq San'ani from Sana'a died in 211 Hijri, about, I'm just going to say 817, 820 of the Common Era. 820 maybe, I can't remember exactly,
right,
of the Common Era. So Malik's generation, kind of the mid 700s, you have people either just collecting everything they've heard in terms of hadiths, companion rulings, what big successor scholars are saying, just putting it all together. Malik ibn Anas in his Muwatta is actually trying to, okay, here's the material on prayer, here's the material on fasting, here's the material on zakat, here's the material on buying and selling things, here's the material on inheritance, here's the material on divorce. And then specific sub-questions. What do you do when you make a mistake in prayer? What can you buy and sell? What are the types of sales you're not allowed to do? And he'll put what are the Quranic verses? What are the hadiths that I know? What are the companion rulings? Let me try and figure this out. What is the ruling I come out with? So those are some of the earliest books. Those books contain hadiths, but they're not hadith books.
Right.
They're like transcripts of all the kind of normative material these scholars are bringing together to try and answer questions.
Right.
The next generation.
This is Imam Bukhari's generation. No.
Now Malik ibn Anas dies 179 Hijri, 795 of the Common Era. Malik just lives in Medina. He doesn't go anywhere. He goes to Hajj.
Yeah.
Abu Hanifa in Kufa lives in Kufa. He goes to Hajj. That's it, right? So they don't. But remember, if you're a, let's say you're, where do your ancestors come from?
India.
Okay, so let's say your ancestors come from, originally, let's say they come from Sindh. Let's just pretend, okay? Yes. They're hanging out in Sindh. One day, these Arab guys show up, which happened, right? 7-Eleven.
Yeah.
And year 7-Eleven, they show up. Hey, we're Muslims. You guys are pretty cool. I like your clothing. You seem to know what's going on. I want to become Muslim. What is Islam? They don't say, hey, go to the bookstore, get a book on Islam. They don't say go to the internet. You know, Islam is what they know it is. If they happen to remember certain hadiths of the Prophet, if they happen to know certain ruling, if like certain companions settled in northeastern Iran, right? The companions who went into Iran, who went into Iraq, they're the ones, it's their understanding of Islam that they're bringing. So the companions who settle in Syria are different than the companions who settle in Basra, or different from the companions who settle in Kufa, different from the companions who settle in Yemen, right? Or in Egypt. Each of them has their own recollections of the Prophet's tradition, of the Prophet's words, of his deeds. They're each applying this tradition of problem solving in different ways. So what you end up with is by the like kind of mid 700s to late 700s, very localized pockets of Islamic knowledge. Kufa is very different from Basra. They're very different from Damascus, very different from Medina. It's a tradition, the generation after Malik. So people living in the late 700s, early 800s, Imam Shafi is a good example, who start traveling around between all these places. And they're not only are they're collecting hadiths from all these places. So they're getting the hadiths from Basra, the hadiths from Kufa, the hadiths from Khorasan, the hadiths from Egypt. What else? I'm going to test you. I mentioned a date earlier, something that happened in 790, around 790, something very important involving technology.
Is it a development of an alternative to paper?
Paper.
Right? Yes.
Right?
Oh, from China.
Exactly.
Right. Yes.
So now suddenly you're not like, you don't have this like expensive scroll. Man, you know, like sometimes you have like one piece of paper and you just write like every tiny little corner. You're not scrolling like every single thing you can fit onto a piece of papyrus that's really expensive or parchment. You can just buy cheap paper and you can write down as much stuff as you want. So suddenly people can write, let's say I hear the same hadith from 5 different teachers. Instead of just writing it down from one teacher, I can write down all 5 chains of transmission. No big deal.
Yeah.
So the next generation, people living in the early 800s, late 700s, early 800s, start writing what's called musnads. Musnad is a collection of hadith, really just focusing on the words of the Prophet, no companion opinions, no successor opinions, no my opinion, right? With full change of transmission back to the Prophet. But these aren't organized topically.
Right.
So remember the books like the Muwatta, I said he's writing, here's a chapter on prayer, sub-chapter on like what time you do the prayers, when do you do the Dhuhr prayer, when do you do the Asr prayer. Musnad is arranged by the isnad. This is completely useless. If you let's say you go and you pick up a musnad, you're like, I want to know, what time I should pray.
Yes.
It could be anywhere in this book.
Yeah.
But let's say I want to know all the hadiths narrated by Ibn Abbas. Oh, that's very easy.
Yes.
Why would someone organize a book like this? Because this is also the time, late 700s, where you have the emergence really of science of what becomes hadith criticism based on the isnad, how it's organized. So these are books for people who are now like professional hadith scholars, late 700s.
Yes.
A couple decades later, the earliest musnad, by the way, we know of is by a Basran scholar named Abu Dawood at-Tayalisi, who died.
How many hadith were in
geez. I should know the answer to this. Not that many. I'm thinking maybe a couple of thousand.
Yeah.
He died at 204 Hijri, 820 of the Common Era. His musnad's actually survived. It's published, right?
Yeah.
So we have it.
Really?
I think it's a couple of volumes. It's not very big.
Okay.
Now, this is great. By the way, the most famous musnad would be the musnad of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, who died in 241 Hijri, 855 of the Common Era.
Right.
And this is about 27,000 hadiths.
Really?
And anywhere from 1/4 to 1/3 of these are repetitions.
Right.
So it's very common to find, let's say in the musnad of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 versions of the same hadith. Okay. Now, next generation. This is almost in generations, like literally like the students of people. So
right.
Ibn Hanbal's students are saying, okay, this is interesting, but these musnads are not useful. So what they do is they take that topically arranged book idea and the idea of books that are just focused on hadiths with full isnads back to the Prophet, and they put them together. And that's what's called sunan books. Sunan. So the first sunan book we know is by a guy named Sa'id bin Mansur. He died, I think, in 227 Hijri, about like now 840 of the Common Era. That book has survived in part. And then a couple of other really famous ones. A guy named Tirmidhi, Abu Dawood, Ibn Majah, and Nasa'i. We know they're authors of 4 of the famous 6 books.
Yes.
Again, they have books that are based on topic, but also with full isnads back to the Prophet. Now, and it's funny because sometimes you'll like go to the mosque and it'll be like something on the bathroom, don't do something in the bathroom, and it'll be like hadith from Sunan of Ibn Majah.
Yes.
Hadith from Sunan of Tirmidhi. Those books have lots of unreliable hadiths in them.
Really?
For example, Tirmidhi's book, he says lots of times, this hadith is weak. Why is it in his book?
Yeah.
Because his book is not, I'm going to tell you the sunnah of the Prophet. His book is, I'm going to give you what are the different hadiths that are used in debates on these legal issues.
Yes.
So some of them will be things that he thinks are actually not reliable that are used by his opponents, for example. So this hadith is not reliable. It's weak chain of transmission.
Right.
So you have to be careful when you look at these books. It's not like this is all reliable according to those authors. Sunan of Ibn Majah has, according to scholars like Dhahabi, famous Damascus scholar who died in 1348 of the Common Era, he says like a quarter of Ibn Majah's book is unreliable.
Really?
So you have to be careful. But why would Ibn Majah have hadith that's unreliable? He's not doing this like, these are all the hadiths that are being used in debates.
Yeah.
Because Ibn Majah's, his approach is more, look, I have like 2 really strong hadiths. Maybe one says like ABC. The other one says CBD. So I know ABC is strong from the Prophet. I know CBD is strong from the Prophet. But look, I have this other version. It's not very strong isnad, but it says ABCD. So put this in. We know the material is reliable, but now you have like one very handy version, right? So the content might be reliable, but that actual hadith is not. So each of these, now 2 scholars from that period, one of them from Bukhara, and then his student from Nishapur in Iran, northeastern Iran, they have a different approach. They say, look, and one of them, Muslim, bin Hajjaj in Nishapur, he dies 268-75 of the Common Era.
Yeah.
He says, look, we have this science of hadith criticism we've developed. Why are we doing this thing where we put an unreliable version of something in? I don't care if it's useful. We're not sure the Prophet said this. We can't put it in here. The whole purpose of our science of hadith criticism is to preserve the words of the Prophet of God. So that's what our job is. So he says, this book is just hadiths with sound chains of transmission back to the Prophet. His teacher, Bukhari, did the same thing in his Sahih, which is even bigger than Muslim Sahih. And so these 2 are like, they stand out in that they only have hadiths that according to the Sunni science of hadith criticism, can be accurately traced. That actual wording can be traced back to the Prophet of God reliably, according to Sunni scholars.
So, why did there is an argument by some Orientalists that I picked up, Godzahir and Shakt. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing their names right, but they argued that the scholarship that came out of the 2nd and 3rd century reflected the cultural, political, and sectarian order of the time. And so these scholars who were compiling the hadith were prejudiced because in some senses they were appealing to the rulers. And so they may have omitted some hadith.
These scholars are getting tortured. I mean, that's kind of, I understand your point, but like that, Ibn Hanbal is like literally gets tortured by the Abbasid government.
Yes.
For not having a certain political opinion or a certain theological opinion.
Yeah.
Bukhari dies literally on the road in exile.
Right.
After he's gotten kicked out of 2 different cities.
Really?
In one city by the ruler, So, I guess everybody is affected by their context, but definitely they're not trying to please any politicians or rulers. Now, okay, so what Goldzaher and Schacht and general kind of Western scholarship argues is that first of all, we have to understand the background of this, right? So what happens, and if you're interested in this, you can read a whole chapter on this in my book on Hadith, but what happens, let's just put it roughly from the 1300s to the 1800s, is that scholars in Western Europe, Christian scholars in Western Europe, gradually figure out that a lot of stuff they thought was true about let's say, the classical tradition and the biblical tradition is not actually true, right? So there wasn't actually some guy named Homer who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, okay? The Bible wasn't, the first 5 books of the Bible were not written down by Moses, right? There is not just 4 gospels telling the story of Jesus. There's a lot of other gospels. These texts went through changes, stuff got added to them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Christian doctrine didn't just come out of, like, Jesus didn't come out and say, here's a list of Christian doctrine that everyone agrees on, and then that was like handed down generally. The church developed and shaped doctrine that's developed over the centuries for various political and social and cultural reasons, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
Right? So what they think is, okay, religion changes over time. Scripture is never authentic, right? Scripture is always being altered or invented or something like that. And what religions are is basically what they're shaped to be by later generations. Right. So they just assume this is true for everybody.
Really?
And they literally say this. Like, they say, we're going to go to India and we're going to like bring the light of our scholarship to them and teach them, what their tradition. We're going to go study their scripture. We're going to figure out what the actual like Vedas are and what the Upanishads are and what the original form of Hinduism was and how it changed over time. Then we're going to tell people this. And they're going to be enlightened, right? So they have just assumptions about how human beings work, which they think apply to everybody in the world at all times. So one of those assumptions is that, certainly from Islam, is that it's not a true religion, right? So they think, maybe this Muhammad guy was like maybe he was like, he was a good leader. He was like, impressive guy, but he definitely wasn't a prophet. Maybe he's crazy. Maybe he's just like Machiavellian and has he's some community building project or something, but he's definitely not a prophet, right? So in that case, anytime we see him saying, for example, there'll come a time when X thing will happen. Like, there will come a time, you'll see black banners coming from the east. So join this army because this is the army of the rightly guided one, right? They'll say, oh, well, this is obviously made up, right? And you can see, look, the Abbasid caliphs, when they do their revolution in the late 740s, early 750s of the Common Era, what color are their clothing? Black. What color are their flags? Black, right? So this is probably made up by the Abbasids. So they're like, they say, hey guys, like, we need to get some, they're like like some politician getting, like the Dominic Cummings of the day or whatever to go and, get some material out there. We want some good PR.
Yes.
So they get these guys to go and like forge these hadiths. And by the way, Muslim scholars very quickly understood there was a huge problem of forged hadiths. So this, like as you get from the time of the companions into the time of successors.
Yes.
Remember, the Muslim community in the first 150 years goes through 3 civil wars, huge wars. Okay, internally, it expands from like Western, basically Arabia, to Morocco to India, and Central Asia. Okay, and so not only do you have 3 civil wars that are over like theological, political issues.
Yes.
You've got all these Christians, you've got Jews, you've got Zoroastrians, you've got Buddhists, you've got Aramaic speakers, you've got Greek speakers, you've got Coptic speakers, you've got everything. All these people are now under your control and they're becoming Muslim, and they're all like, hey, I have an idea. Like my culture's kind of interesting. Well, what about this? And everyone's, first of all, they're forging hadiths.
Yes.
Second of all, they're just getting confused. They get confused about, is this something that Prophet said or is this something that someone else said? And so stuff. There's intentional forgery. There's accidental confusion. And Muslim scholars are inundated by this.
Right.
So very quickly, they realize this is a serious issue. And they start trying to figure out ways to sort out what's the authentic words of the Prophet from mistakes or forgeries.
And how did they do that?
Okay. Well, first, let me just, we'll talk about that in a second, but let me finish the example of the kind of orientalist approach, right?
Oh, yes.
So this is just an example of kind of how Western assumptions about history can blind Western scholars to other possibilities, right? So they assume that if you see a hadith that says black banners are going to come from the east, join them because there's the army, the rightly guided one.
Yeah.
They say, oh, this was made up by the Abbasids. Okay, here's the thing. In the 1640s, this one of the founders of the Quaker movement, a guy named John Naylor, he goes to Bristol, and he does so riding on a donkey, and his followers are like singing like Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna for him. Okay. Why is he doing this? Okay. Jesus in the New Testament enters Jerusalem riding on a donkey with people putting like palm fronds in front of him, and they're saying like Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna. In the Old Testament, there's prophecies about this, your Messiah will come to Jerusalem riding on a donkey, people putting palm fronds in front of him and saying Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna. Okay. So what happens? According to like the Orientalist view of the world, John Naylor's people, like these early Quakers, are like, we got to get some good material out there. Okay, so they would go back, insert this story in the New Testament about Jesus, insert the story in the Old Testament, and then to match what he's doing. Of course, that's ridiculous because the New Testament, Old Testament, has already been around for thousands of years. Similarly, they would say Jesus's followers were like, we got to get some good material out there, so they put this in the Old Testament. Or how about this? There's an Old Testament prophecy about someone entering Jerusalem, riding on a donkey, people putting palm fronds in front of them, saying Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna. Then Jesus, in the biblical tradition, I'm not talking about Islamic Jesus, right? Yes. Biblical tradition, acts out that prophecy. John Naylor in the 1600s acts out that prophecy, right? So which came first, chicken or the egg, right? Is it that the Abbasids had this material circulated? Or is it that there's a hadith that exists about this something happening, and then they tailor, I mean, they didn't have to pick black. Why did they pick? Were they like early Goths or something? They picked black. They, for their banner colors, in part to actually act out this scripture, this prophecy.
Yes.
So it's the perspective one has, and your assumptions really color what your conclusions are. So that's what they. So this is an important I think, critique of the Western scholarly tradition.
Yes.
Okay. Now, as I mentioned before, Muslim scholars, Sunni Hadith scholars, will happily admit and always admitted there's an enormous amount of forged hadiths.
Right.
One famous scholar, one of the most famous scholars of hadith ever, a guy named Shu'bah ibn al-Hajjaj, who died around 773. He's from Basra. He said, 3/4 of the hadiths I've come across are forged.
Right.
3/4. This is a huge problem. That's why they developed these methods of hadith criticism.
Really?
Okay. Now, you might say, okay, but, I was reading Sunan of Abu Dawood and there was a hadith in there that seemed really, for example, there's a hadith in Sunan of Abu Dawood. Abu Dawood as-Sijistani died 275 Hijri, 889 of the Common Era, big scholar from Basra, student of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, important scholar. In his Sunan, he writes a letter to the people of Mecca. He says about his Sunan, this book, if you have the Quran and my book, this is all you need. Right. This is what you need to understand your religion. Mm-hmm. So he feels his Sunan book is really an accurate reflection of the Sunnah of the Prophet.
Yes.
But there's a hadith in Sunan of Abu Dawood. It says, let nobody travel by ocean except if they're doing Hajj or Umrah or fighting in the path of God. Underneath the ocean is a fire. Underneath the fire is another ocean. And you might, let's say you're a geologist. You're like, this doesn't make any sense. What do you mean underneath the fire is another, underneath the ocean is a fire, underneath the fire is another ocean? What?
Yes.
This hadith, certainly that part of the hadith, Muslim scholars, like a great scholar from the 1400s, Ibn al-Mulaqin, he said from Cairo, he says, the Imams agreed on the weakness of this. This is unreliable.
Right. So why did he put it into his book?
Good question. Yeah. We don't know. I mean, we don't know the answer to that. Like in this, sometimes Abu Dawood has a hadith in his book, and he points out there's a flaw in this chain of transmission.
Yes. Yeah.
Maybe he thinks that it's backed up enough by communal practice, or maybe it's not like a really important issue. That's why he has it in here. But we don't know why that's in there. But we do know that Muslim scholars, like they're always engaged in self-criticism. They'll say, look, this is unreliable.
Right.
Another reason, by the way, you say, why does he put it in there? One of the things we know about Sunni Hadith scholarship, we know this because they say it. They tell us this explicitly. As far back as we can trace Sunni Hadith scholarship, we have this principle. They say, if we come across hadiths that deal with like halal and haram, that deal with ahkam, like prayer, fasting, buying and selling, marriage, divorce law, stuff like that, we're very strict about the change of transmission. We're very strict in our criticism. If we come across stuff about manners, what if you do this deed, you're going to get this reward in the afterlife, like doing a dua, they say we're lax.
Right.
Tasahelna. We are lax in our criticism of the change of transmission. Why would they say this? For them, these are the second things are not core issues of the religion.
Right.
There's stuff you already know. For example, in let's say Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Let's say in Sunnah of Abu. That's a good example. Okay. Here's a good example.
Right.
It's going to be a little bit vulgar. It's not my fault.
I'm ready.
Okay.
Yes.
You see this in the Sunnah of Ibn Majah. The Prophet says there's 72 types of riba. The least severe type is the equivalent of having sex with your mother. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The least severe type is the equivalent of having sex with your mother.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. When I told you that, were you like, whoa?
I've heard it before, but when I first heard it, I was, yes.
Yeah, you're like, whoa. I was in the Jummah once, and I was like, whoa. Like I had like a checking account or something. I don't know. I get like 2% interest a year. I was like, maybe I should not do this.
Yes.
So this hadith is unreliable. It's criticized by so many Muslim scholars, pre-modern Muslim scholars, way before modernity and Britain and America and all this stuff. one of the things they criticize, first of all, the chains of transmissions are all unreliable. The second thing is, like Ibn al-Jawzi, famous scholar from Baghdad, died in 1200 of the Common Era. He says, this hadith, yufsidu mawazin maqadir al-amal. It destroys your capacity for like balancing moral acts. Like if you think that getting 1%, 1 penny of interest on $1 million is the same as having zina, like doing something that every society in the world thinks is disgusting, like you're not going to be able to do moral calculation. You're not going to be able to like weigh moral actions. You're going to kind of be morally disabled in a way. This is his criticism.
Yes.
I think that's a very good criticism. But why would this hadith be in there? Remember what they said, their principle. If it's something to do with like the virtues or punishment, you do this act, you're going to get this punishment. You do this act, you're going to get this reward. They say we're lax on the isnads. We already know riba is haram. We know riba is haram from the Quran.
Yes.
We know riba is haram from the hadith. That's already established. This hadith isn't adding anything new. For Ibn Majah, what it's doing is it's scaring your pants off. Like, this is really going to make you not do riba. We know you're not supposed to do it. This is going to be maybe the Prophet said it. Maybe like 20% he said it.
Yeah.
It's useful.
Right.
That's what Muslim is objecting to. One of the things, that's I think chiefly what Muslim and Bukhari are objecting to. They don't care how useful this material is. They don't care. They disagree with that policy of strictness with things dealing with law, laxity with stuff dealing with this kind of other stuff. They disagree with that. They say you have to be strict with everything. So that's why and you can read this in the introduction to Muslim Sahih. This is what he says. This is the thing he's hammering on.
Right. So back to the criteria then. What criteria do they lay out to determine whether a hadith is Sahih or not? What do they have to establish in the hadith and its chain?
Yeah.
Okay,
so first of all, we have to remember that there's multiple ways you could decide if you think the Prophet ﷺ actually said something.
Right.
Okay. So if I say to you, here's a hadith, and this is actually it's an alleged hadith. It's a forged hadith, but I'm going to tell you. It's not, just so the viewers/listeners know this. Don't get confused, okay?
Yes.
The first thing God created is a horse, was the horse. The horse sweated, and then God created himself from the sweat. What do you think? Do you think the Prophet said this or not?
It sounds very strange.
Yeah, it sounds very. There's a couple of problems here, right?
Yes.
So first of all, like I don't know, like is God created? The Quran talks about like lam yalid wa lam yulad, right?
Yes.
God's the creator.
Yes.
He's not created.
Yes.
So this hadith kind of contradicts the Quran, right?
Yes.
The Quran, the idea that God is created from horse sweat.
Yes.
This is problematic.
Yes.
Okay. So one thing we do is we say, look, we have the foundation of our religion is the Quran, has very important ideas in it. And this hadith is just, we literally, there's no human way, no conceivable way to reconcile this with the Quran. So it contradicts the Quran.
Would there be any flaws in the isnad, in the chain of narration?
There is no chain of transmission for this hadith.
Okay.
It's not even a chain. It's just
Really?
something floating around and some idiot was, saying in Baghdad in like 700 or something like that.
Okay. Yes.
Well, Baghdad wasn't founded in 700. 770. So, second problem. You seem like you're a pretty scientifically inclined guy.
My appearance very deceptive.
You have glasses. Come on. You have those are kind of the NASA guy glasses.
Yeah.
And Malcolm X glasses.
Okay. Yes.
So is there anything else problematic, maybe logically, with this hadith? God created the horse sweated, then he created himself from the sweat.
Well, I mean, the point you made, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not created. Okay, so that's okay. Allah creates a horse, and then from the horse, Allah is created. That doesn't.
That's
logically flawed.
The effect is preceding the cause.
Yes.
It's illogical. So
Yes.
it violates the kind of first principle of reason,
Yes.
which is that you can't have the effect precede the cause.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
So in our critique of this hadith, we used two tools. We said it contradicts the Quran. It contradicts just fundamental premise of reason.
Yes.
Okay. And you can see this, for example, in Abu Hanifa's book, Al-Alim wal-Muta'allim, a very early text,
right,
where he says, if a hadith that says that, any hadith that says that an action makes you non-Muslim, like, let's say I go to this fancy whiskey shop across the street I saw. I'll just buy a big thing of whiskey. I start chugging it.
Yes.
Okay. Then I'm just being a bad Muslim, right?
Yes.
But I'm still Muslim.
Yes.
It's general Sunni principle, right? Actions don't make you not Muslim. You're just committing sins. You're just you're just being a sinful Muslim, right?
Yes.
Okay. So what he says, if you see a hadith that says that there's an action that makes you non-Muslim, the Prophet couldn't have said it.
Right.
Because now this is something that's not in the Quran, right? But it is in Abu Hanifa's understanding of the Sunnah and the teachings of the Prophet. So he's saying, if we know the Prophet taught X, and you see a hadith that says not X or opposite of X, it can't be something the Prophet said. Okay. So it's not just that we're saying a hadith contradicts the Quran, it contradicts the established Sunnah of the Prophet, it contradicts first principles of reason. It can't be something the Prophet said, because the Prophet is not going to say something illogical, right? Or something impossible. Fine. Here's the problem. So that's an approach to hadith criticism that all Muslim scholars agree with.
Yes.
You can go back to, the early Muslim rationalists, the Mu'tazilites. They were big on this. You can go back to their opponents, the early Sunnis like Ibn Hanbal. They might not say this, but they also agree with this. If you go and look in early Sunni books of hadith criticism where they're actually laying out the rules that are written in like the 1000s, they'll say any hadith that contradicts the Quran, contradicts the established Sunnah of the Prophet, that contradicts reason, it can't be something the Prophet said.
Right.
Okay. So that's one approach. Everybody agrees with it, but here's the problem. It's very hard in practice. Yeah. Very hard in practice. Why? Imagine I tell you this. I say, here's a hadith. I'm pretty sure it's in the Allahumma salli. I think it might be in the Musnad of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, but I can't be sure. But I'm not sure. It's an early hadith, but it's not in a main collection.
Right.
That the Prophet said, I was shown God in the shape of an amrad. Amrad is a beardless youth, a young, beautiful boy. Prophet said, I saw God I was shown God in the shape of a young, beautiful youth. Oh, right? This is interesting. So early Muslim rationalists, like the Mu'tazilites, said, this is ridiculous. Right. This can't be something the Prophet said. Why? Yes. The Quran says, "Laysa kamithlihi shay." There's nothing like unto God. He's the one who perceives you. You don't perceive. You don't have basar, perception of God.
Yes.
Okay? Let alone, he's like a beardless youth. I mean, maybe you see like light or something. I mean, whatever. But I mean, this is absurd. It clearly contradicts the Quran.
Yes.
Okay. Some early Sunnis, it's not that they agree with the idea of this hadith, but what they really don't like is people superpowering their reason. Right. So what they say is, Mu'tazilites, early Muslim rationalists, what do you know? Like, you don't know the nature of God. Like, you don't know the unseen realm of the ghaib, And what does the Quran say about earlier communities? They go astray when they start to speculate about God. They start to go away from revelation and start to like invent their own forms. They start to like do theology and speculation and all these things.
Yes. So
we need to stick to the Sunnah of the Prophet. We don't know the nature of God. We only know what the Quran tells us. If the Prophet tells us this, we really don't have, we're not in a position to say this contradicts the Quran because he's the one explaining the Quran to us. So if he says this, we don't actually have the right to kind of dissent or whatever.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
Now, the other Sunni scholars, very senior Sunni scholars like Al-Dhahabi, say this hadith is ridiculous. Of course it's ridiculous. First of all, the chain of transmission is not that strong. Okay. Second of all, you exactly what we said before, you can't see this contradicts the Quran.
Yes.
Some Sunni scholars like Mullah Ali Qari is a famous scholar from Mecca. Originally he's from Herat. He died in 1606, sorry, the Common Era. He says, maybe the Prophet saw it in a dream. And you can see whatever in a dream. I the other day I had a dream and I saw like a giant hamburger walking around or something. That doesn't mean, so whatever, I'm not responsible for this. It's a dream. You can see like there's a lot of dissent. Some scholars are kind of trying to figure out ways to accept it. Some scholars are clearly saying no, it's unacceptable.
But why are they trying to do that when the isnad is unreliable?
Okay, let's use a different example that's maybe like more helpful in this regard. Okay. So there's a hadith considered reliable chain of transmission, which says that God, sometime late at night, God descends from the highest heavens to hear the prayers of those people who are still awake in prayer. Okay. Those early Muslim rationalists, the Mu'tazilites, they reject this, just out of hand. Why? I don't care how strong the chain of transmission is. Why? If God's moving, if he moves from here to here, what does that mean about God? Yeah. It means he's in a body. Yeah. Okay. Also, where is he moving around? Like, is he in creation? Is he outside in like some void or something? Like God, if you're moving around, it means you're in space, you're in time, you're in a body. And this all contradicts how we conceptualize God based on Quranic teachings. They just say we reject this. Their Sunni opponents, people like Ibn Hanbal al-Bukhari, would say, no, like the Prophet said this. What right do you have to dissent? Also, they'll say the Quran in Surah I think it's Surah al-Fajr. It says what the angels and God on the Day of Judgment will come saffan saffa. They'll come rank in rank. Right? They'll come like, but the Mu'tazilites say, no, this is allegorical. It's like the power of God is coming. It's like, okay, it's allegorical. Why don't you make this hadith allegorical too? Look, we're not saying God is like actually dropping down. In fact, Sunni theologians would say it's like it's the mercy of God that's coming down. It's almost like the metaphor of like a parent kind of leaning over their child to hear what they're saying. So it's we're not saying God moves. It's just metaphorical. Yes. Right? So when we say, God's eyes are on us, we don't literally think God has eyes like human eyes. It just means God's aware of what we're doing. Right. So they're saying, if you're willing to interpret this Quranic verse allegorically, why are you so quick to dismiss this hadith? So the rules we mentioned before, if a alleged hadith contradicts the Quran, contradicts the established sunnah of the Prophet, contradicts first principles of reason, it can't be something the Prophet said. The difference between, let's say, a Muslim rationalist, like the Mu'tazilites, and a Sunni is not in that they disagree with the rules, it's that how much kind of charity they're willing to potentially give a hadith before they say this can't be the sunnah of the Prophet. So someone like Mullah Ali Qari with that hadith of the beardless youth, he's willing to give out a lot of charity. He's saying maybe it was a dream. Dhahabi, also Sunni, he's not so willing. Yes. Right? Sometimes, okay, so let me get back to your question, right? So this is why Sunni scholars focus on the isnad. Right. If you have the Quran, and if you understand the Quran through the Sunnah of the Prophet, it's very hard to know the difference between contradiction and explanation. Okay. So if I say, the Prophet said, for example, the Quran says that meta, carrion, meat of a dead animal is prohibited for you. You find a dead animal, you can't eat it. Sure. But then the companions of the Prophet find a dead whale washed up on the beach of the Red Sea, and they eat some of the meat. And then they tell the Prophet later about this, and he doesn't say anything. He doesn't have a problem. And in fact, he says, the ocean is pure and its dead are pure. So you can use the ocean water to do wudu. It's fine. And you can eat a dead fish from, or whatever. You can eat a fish even you don't do like cutting its throat or whatever.
Yeah.
You could say that hadith contradicts the Quran because the Quran says you don't eat carrion. But this hadith is explaining that rule is applying to land animals, not to sea animals.
Right.
So it's very hard to know the difference between contradiction and explanation. Second, we don't know the unseen. God and the Prophet know the unseen, right? So, for example, if the Prophet says, alayhi salam, says that on the Day of Judgment, we're going to see God. Like you see the full moon. This is hadith, very famous hadith in Sahih Bukhari and other books. Mu'tazilites would say, this is impossible. Again, God is in a body, is receiving him. It goes against our theology as we understand it as Muslims. Early Sunnis say, no, wait a second. Listen, Day of Judgment is a different universe. Like nothing we know it's a different creation. We have how are we going to, you're going to sit around, we're going to say, us human beings are just going around trying to like milk camels and, get enough food to eat and raise our kids and stuff like that. We don't even know what's going on in the world around us. We're going to say what's possible and impossible in the next life. This is only God's knowledge. If God and the Prophet tell us something, we don't have a right to object. Of course, then some Sunni scholars, probably the majority, would say, okay, yes, it's not, maybe you're not actually seeing God. Maybe God creates an image in your mind or something. So they reconcile it. So the second thing is, the Prophet is telling us about things. We don't have the capacity to object to. We don't have the knowledge to object to.
Yes.
All right. So if there's serious constraints on our ability to kind of examine the contents of these hadiths, what do? Well, we're going to look at the chains of transmission. So what do? They say, first of all, if somebody comes and tells you something, the Prophet said this, the first thing they do is they have to provide a chain of transmission. They have to provide an isnad. Like the famous scholar Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak said, al-isnad min ad-din, lawla al-isnad, laqal man yasha ma yasha. The isnad is part of the religion. If it weren't for the isnad, whoever wants could say whatever they wanted. Right? So if I come to you and say, I just heard, someone comes to you and says, Jonathan Brown just told me, such and such a thing.
Yes.
How do you know that? Or who told you that? He said this.
Social media told me.
Yeah, I say, who said this? Like, what's your chain? What's your source? Anything that we don't perceive or experience ourselves comes to us through some kind of chain of transmission. Hearing, seeing, a report, seeing a video, hearing a story from secondhand, third hand, right? So everything that's not perceived by us, by our senses, comes through some kind of intermediary chain of transmission.
Yes.
So first of all, you have to have a chain of transmission. Second of all, the chain of transmission has to be reliable. So if somebody says, hey, I heard that, tomorrow all the flights out of Heathrow are canceled. I'm traveling tomorrow, inshallah. So I'll be like, who told you that? Think about it. Even common sense. Who told you that? Some guy on the street. Oh, some guy on the street told you that. Okay, well, that's really interesting. Yeah. Maybe I'll go check. This is actually interesting because imagine somebody tells you, some guy just told me that.
Yes.
Would you ignore it or would you actually go like online and look up Heathrow? I would do that, right? I'll be like, maybe that guy knows what he's talking about. I would check.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this question. Let's say somebody comes up to you and says, did you know that chocolate ice cream is like bad for your health? And then you say, well, who told you that? Some guy on the street.
Yeah.
Would you check that out?
No.
No, I'd be like, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
Why? Some things are important to us. Some things are not important to us. Remember what the early Sunni scholars said. There's certain things we're really strict on. There's certain things we're not strict on. So let's say it's an important thing, the Heathrow Airport thing. You're going to go, but let's say there's no internet. This is before the internet.
Yes.
Right? What do? You go and you find out, well, first of all, you'd say, some idiot told you this, but you go ask your other friend, did you hear this? Yeah, actually, Muhammad, my friend Ahmed told me this. Ahmed, eh? So you go and you find out, what are other things Ahmed said? Is this the same Ahmed who told you once that, I don't know, human beings are actually capable of, memorizing, or that human beings, if they eat chewing gum, it stays in their stomach for their whole life or something like that. Yes. That same Ahmed, the same Ahmed who told me all this other stuff. Yes. So I know that Ahmed. I've heard the stuff he says. It's not reliable.
Yeah.
But let's say it's Ahmed who, this guy's everything he's ever told you turns out to be correct. Then you're probably going to believe the thing about Heathrow Airport. Okay. So here's the question. So first of all, you have to have a chain of transmission. And then how do you know the person in the chain of transmission is reliable? Based on their track record. So in this case, Ahmed, his history. He's a serious guy. He's thoughtful. He doesn't lie. He doesn't exaggerate. He's not stupid, right? But let's say you don't know this person. You go and you find out who are their students or who heard stuff from them. Okay, this guy, let's say Abu Bakr heard something from him. Abu Bakr said, Ahmed told me A, B, C, D. And I go to another student, let's say Sarah. She says, Ahmed told me A, B, C, D. Okay. You go to another student, Haytham. Haytham says, Ahmed told me A, B, C, D. So actually, it seems like everything they're saying Ahmed says is corroborated by other people. Now let's say instead of Ahmed, it's like another guy, Tariq. I go to his students. They say, Tariq told me A. Another one, he told me B. Another one, he told me C, D. These guys are not really corroborating what this person said. So that person's doesn't have a strong reliability. So you go back for each link in the chain of transmission and you do this. Right. Who are their students? What are their students saying they transmitted? Are they corroborating one another? Then you have to make sure they actually met one another. So let's say you ask me who told you this information about, who told you Heathrow's closed tomorrow? Rishi Sunak told me this. Did you meet Rishi Sunak? Did you talk to him about this? I know you never met him. You've been sitting at home all day, and you never go to wherever these, wherever the politicians hang out, right? Yeah. So you never hang out there. So I don't think you actually met this guy. Or let's say I tell you, I say, where did you get these glasses from? Malcolm X gave them to me. I was like, you were born this year, he died this year. It's impossible. There has to be some intermediary, and you're not telling me who it is. If I don't know who the intermediary is, that person could be a lunatic. It could be a liar. So anytime there's a break in the chain of transmission, automatically this is unreliable. Right. But let's say I figured out this person met this person, he met his teacher, she met her teacher, right, et cetera. Back to the Prophet, alayhi salam. Each person I've checked, are they reliable based on their corroboration?
Yes.
That's a strong chain of transmission. Now, what's even more important isn't just that you have one chain of transmission, but that it's transmitted by lots of people.
Right.
So if the Prophet said something, alayhi salam, it's probably the case that multiple people narrate this from him. Or if, let's say, you're a really important scholar, like Malik ibn Anas from Medina, unless you're the most senior student of Malik who studied with him the longest, chances are there's lots of people who are going to narrate this from him.
Yes. So
if you only have one person narrating from him, it's getting suspicious. Why aren't there more people? So it's not just that you have to have a sound chain of transmission. That chain of transmission also has to be corroborated for a hadith to be very strong.
So are you saying that the scholars of hadith went through this pretty involved process to determine whether a hadith is sahih or not?
Oh, yeah.
And, it seems like it's so involved, it would probably take a lot of time up.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very Yeah, so it's an intense process.
Yeah, very intense. I mean, it's difficult to, when you read about what they're doing, it's difficult to keep up. Like it's hard. I'm at like the edge of my capacity, even trying to track what they're doing, let alone replicate what they're doing.
And what's the relationship then between a muhaddith, on the one hand, who's at the later stages you describe they're responsible for determining whether a hadith is sahih or not, and a mujtahid who's responsible for giving judicial verdicts or Islamic verdicts. Are mujtahideen muhaddithin by definition, or do they rely on the muhaddith to supply them with hadith?
So an important thing to keep in mind is that let's say the different schools of law, they emerge from, the Hanafi school emerges from Abu Hanifa and his companions in the mid 700s in Kufa.
You're right.
Maliki school emerges from Malik and his students in Medina in the late 700s, early 800s.
Yeah.
Shafi school, students of Shafi in Egypt, then after him. Hanbali school from students of Ibn Hanbal in Baghdad in the mid 800s. These all predate. Remember, the 6 books are compiled in the mid to late 800s.
Yes.
This is all post the actual emergence of these schools of law. So it's not like, Imam Shafi'i or Abu Hanifa was like, I need to make a madhab. Yes. So like, go get me the books of hadith so I can figure out what to do.
Yeah.
Right. They have they're collecting their own material. Abu Hanifa is collecting hadiths that are circulating in Kufa. Imam Shafi'i's going around to different parts of the different cities of the Muslim world collecting material, right? So their understanding of Islamic law is based on their school, its approach, right? The collection of hadiths in the books that we know of, right, is a separate process.
Right.
Now, it doesn't mean it's isolated from that. For example, scholars who compiled the 6 books, they're not like neutral people. They're not like, I'm not in a madhab, I don't want to get in these debates. They're all coming out of the tradition of Ibn Hanbal and Imam Shafi.
Yes.
So what's called the Ahl Hadith tradition. They're not big fans of Abu Hanifa.
Yeah.
Rahimahullah. They disagree with him on issues.
Yes.
I mean, they disagree with him. I shouldn't say they're not big fans. They have disagreements with him. So the 6 books are an expression of basically what would become the Shafi and the Hanbali schools of law. Now, what then happens is, so that's, let's say we're getting into the 800s of the Common Era, late 800s, early 900s of the Common Era. Some scholars from the Hanafi tradition, especially an Egyptian scholar named al-Tahawi, who dies in 932 of the Common Era. He actually studies with, his uncle is one of Shafi's senior students.
Yes.
He starts out as a student in the Shafi tradition. He becomes Hanafi. What he does is, but he learned the Sunni science of hadith criticism. So what he goes and he does is he collects all these hadiths and he kind of puts them through the Sunni critical process. And then he says, he backs up the Hanafi school of law, its rulings, with hadiths. Then there's a scholar in what's now Lisbon, named Ibn Abd al-Barr. He dies in 463, 1070 of the Common Era, named Ibn Abd al-Barr. He does the same thing for the Maliki school.
Really?
There's a scholar he's from Bayhaq, which is near, kind of between Nishapur and Tehran today. A scholar named Bayhaqi, dies 1066 of the Common Era. And he does the same thing for the Shafi'i school, right? So what they do is the different schools of law will go and say, okay, we're now going to back up and kind of prove all our legal rulings with these hadiths and using our shared method of hadith criticism.
Fantastic.
But let me ask. Sorry, you answered another question, but I forgot to answer. Right.
Yeah.
This debate about kind of division of labor,
yes,
is a really important one, right? a jurist, a faqih, is different from a hadith scholar. Hadith scholar studies hadith, maybe tries to authenticate them, collect different versions, figure out which ones are stronger, maybe even explain the hadith. The job of a jurist is different. The job of a jurist is to provide answers to legal questions.
Yes.
Can I eat this? How do I treat my mother? Can I buy Bitcoin or whatever, right? There could be hadith scholars who are also jurists, like Imam al-Bukhari. Bukhari was a hadith scholar and a jurist. There could be hadith scholars who are not jurists, like, for example, Ibn Abi Hatim al-Razi, who died in about 938 of the Common Era. He's from Ray, what's today Tehran. He's just a hadith scholar. He doesn't write legal opinions and stuff. And you have scholars who are jurists and not hadith scholars. So, for example, Al-Ghazali. Al-Ghazali knows more about hadith than you and me times 10. Okay, so this is not to say he's ignorant. He knows a huge amount about hadith.
Yes.
But that's not his specialization.
Right.
His specialization is theology, law, Sufism, right? Those are his books he writes. So for him, by the time he's living in the 1000s of the Common Era, he's got these 6 books. He's got other books of hadith. If he wants to go look stuff up and use it, he'll say this book, and he'll give his evidence. Say, this hadith that I'm using is in this book, to sort of show its strength. Or its scholars have said it's sahih, or said it's hasan.
Yes.
So he's a jurist. But you have that's a different job. Just if you, for example, if sometimes a lot of misunderstanding happens when people think that you just, you want to know an answer to a legal question. And what do? You just go look at hadiths. This is ignorance.
Right.
Because no Muslim scholar that I know of who's worth their salt would ever have recommended this.
Right.
Because, as I said before, let's say I go and see this hadith about the Prophet used to do wudu after he ate cooked meat. I'll be like, oh my God. Everybody's been doing this wrong. Everybody, quick. You just ate this biryani. Don't pray. You have to do wudu first. I just saw this hadith. Look, people for 1400 years have been doing this work. They take the hadiths, they figure out how they fit together, they figure out how they relate to interpretation of scholarly interpretation, figure out how it relates to communal practice, these different ways of understanding the Sunnah. They take this, they put it in relationship with the Quran, they figure out how it relates to a specific, time and circumstance, and then they come up with a legal ruling. Right. That's the job of jurists.
Right.
So the mistake, it's not that, hadiths, if you study hadiths, you don't understand Islamic law, or you study Islamic law, you don't understand hadiths. You could do both. The mistake is to think that you can answer legal or theological questions just by randomly going to hadiths and kind of picking this and that. Because that's not the process that Muslim scholars followed. Whether they're Salafi or Madhabi, no people would recommend this.
Now, I know that time is against us and you have to move on to your next appointment, but I would like to ask you a few questions about the modern context. So recently online, there was a debate or a discussion about Abu Hurairah, radiallahu anhu, and his hadith, and the argument put forward, in this case by some women activists, was that his hadith tend to confirm a very misogynistic view of the world, and then they question whether he really had the ability to relay the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. He had only been a Muslim for 3 or 4 years, I think it was, prior to the passing of the Messenger. How would you respond to, and there are lots of debates like this all the time by all sorts of quite liberal-minded people, by postmodernists, by socialist-minded, where they question parts of the hadith based on, and sometimes they go back to the original sources and argue that the narrators, the source narrators, were fundamentally flawed.
So this is as they say, we've seen this movie before, right? So
tenet.
Muslim scholars have been debating this since the 700s. I'm not joking.
Right.
In the court of the Abbasid Caliph in the late 700s, there was a debate between some of the kind of more rationalist scholars who were with the Caliph and this early Sunni named Omar bin Habib. He died 820 of the Common Era.
Yeah.
And guess what they're saying? The rationalists were saying, Abu Hanifa is not a jurist. He's not reliable. You can't take material from him. And what Omar bin Habib says is, listen, you got to be really careful. If you're suggesting that the companions of the Prophet don't understand the Prophet's Sunnah, how are you going to get the Sunnah of the Prophet? They're essential either through their transmission of a hadith or their understanding of his tradition of problem solving.
Yeah.
They're an essential bridge. So be very careful.
Right.
This is a debate has been going on for, what is that, like 1,200 years? It's a long time. And here's the thing about Abu Hurairah, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. One, he very rarely narrates hadith that's not narrated by somebody else. So almost all the hadith Abu Hurairah narrates are narrated by other companions. So let's say you get rid of all of these hadiths. They're still going to be narrated, most of the materials are already coming from other companions.
Right.
Second, the people say, oh, he only knew the Prophet for 3 years. Yeah, okay. But, Ibn Abbas was like only 14 years old when the Prophet died. He narrates, thousands of hadith too. How's this? Because they, as I said before, they're not quoting the Prophet most of the time. They just say the Prophet said, or they say, I heard this from another companion.
Yeah. So
they're getting it from an intermediary. And you can say, well, why don't they say that? Because at that point in history, people aren't obsessively, for example, if you tell me like, the Prime Minister said this, Prime Minister said that.
Yeah.
Do you say, I saw on BBC, I read in The Guardian?
Yes.
I mean, you could, but I'd get kind of bored. I'd be like, listen, could you stop telling me all like the weird places you read this? Just tell me what happened, right?
Yeah.
So that's how they're in that, especially in that first generation Muslim, they're not obsessively saying, I heard this from this companion. So he just says, the Prophet said. Even scholars like Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, big hadith scholar from Cairo who died in 1449, he says, in terms of the Sahih hadiths that Ibn Abbas transmits, he probably only heard 40 hadiths from the Prophet directly. Everything else he's getting from another companion that he either mentions or he omits to mention. That's not a problem in the early period because they didn't have this. It would be like me going back and insisting that anytime you quoted like a British politician and didn't say where you read it, I'm going to ignore it.
Right.
I mean, I can't go back and ask you to act in a way that wasn't required from you at the time or expected from you at the time.
Yeah.
So that's the thing about, and it's kind of weird that people keep bringing this up about Abu Hurairah because it's very easy to explain.
Yes.
But the third thing is, about him being a misogynist. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, if you go in Sahih Muslim, you open up a chapter about this on the description of Jannah and its blessings. There's a report where the Prophet has died. There's just some people debating in Medina. They're having a little debate. Are there more women in paradise than men? And they go to Abu Hurairah and he's like, he thinks about it. He said, okay, I think there are more women. He says, why? Because the Prophet said every man is going to have like more than one wife in paradise. So if there's more than one wife, then that means there's more women than men. That's his own calculation. He's thinking about, okay, I think this.
Yes.
That's not a hadith of the Prophet, but that's Abu Hurairah doing legal reasoning.
Yes.
So you can criticize him for being right or wrong or whatever, but he's not saying definitely men because women suck or something, right? So I don't understand. Is this Abu Hurairah the misogynist?
Yes.
So I think this is people, as I said before, the difference. Let me rephrase that, right? Every Muslim scholar in history has acknowledged that hadith forgery is a serious problem. Okay? That's why there's a science of hadith criticism in the Islamic tradition.
Right.
every Muslim scholar that I know of in Islamic history has, either they have openly acknowledged it or they belong to a tradition that acknowledges that a hadith can't contradict the Quran, it can't contradict the established sunnah of the Prophet, it can't contradict the first principles of reason, because those things can't be things the Prophet said, right? Oh, by the way, another thing they say is a hadith can't be racist. So if you have a hadith that's like insulting a whole group of people or a whole race, it can't be something the Prophet said. Because people talk about this a lot today. Now, this is agreed upon. Where is the disagreement? How you apply this test. How willing are you to be charitable and offer, trying to reconcile between like the Quran and a potential hadith?
Yes.
How humble are you? Right? One of the things you see in kind of Islamic modernists or kind of progressive Muslims is, let's just say, a significantly reduced level of humility, a certainty about their moral or scientific view of the world, and not being willing to say, like, you know what, maybe God and the Prophet know better than us on something. That's, I think, what's really at issue. So in some ways, these debates, although they might be about Abu Hurairah or about whether we believe hadith or not, that's not really what the debate is. The debate is, how willing are we to subordinate what people around us are saying are the certainties, the moral certainties, the political certainties, whatever, scientific certainties of our world. How willing are we saying these are more powerful than the message of God and his prophet? That's what we're saying. That's the debate, right?
Yes.
Or are we saying that if we're going to be Muslim, it can only be an Islam that is really defined by, let's say, progressive sensibilities? Or should progressive sensibilities have to stand the test of the core message of the Sunnah, of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet? Like, these are the really debates that are happening.
Lastly, Dr. Brown, what's the rule regarding the person who, at the very beginning, you said there are some Muslims or some people who argue that we should just abide by Quranic injunctions and not the Hadith. Now, notwithstanding all that you've said, that the Hadith explains the Quran and you cannot de-link the two and it's impossible to just follow the Quran. But notwithstanding that, if someone insisted that the Hadith corpus I reject as a complete source of Shariah, what is the hukum shari regarding that person, his state of Islam?
Yeah, so like, first of all, I'm not like a mufti and I'm not qualified to give legal rulings or something.
Yes.
But I can tell you how other people have answered this question, right? So, I mean, first of all, just as a kind of sort of baseline, right? The general answer of Muslim scholars like al-Hafidh al-Iraqi, who died 806 Hijri, Mullah Ali Qari, I mentioned him already, died 1606 of the Common Era.
Yes.
So, is to say, and this is generally shared, right? If you reject something that's mutawatir, that means massively transmitted from the Prophet, or like the Quran, that's mutawatir, right? If you reject something like this, like the Prophet existed, the Prophet's name was Muhammad, right? That he lived in Mecca and he moved to Medina, and he told us that we're not supposed to drink wine and we're not supposed to eat pork, right? If you reject this kind of thing, you would not be Muslim,
right?
Now, if it's just an isolated report, so let's say even one that's sahih. So let's say something like Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Like, okay, I mean, let's just use this one. Like, someone could say that the Prophet said that there's more women in hellfire than men. If you reject this, then this could be sinful, you could be wrong, you could be misguided, but you're still Muslim.
Yes.
In the middle tier, there's something called mashhur or mustafid hadith. These are hadith that are not massively transmitted.
Yes.
But they're very well known. They're not kind of single narrations.
Yes.
One opinion is that if you reject this, you wouldn't be Muslim. But Mullah Ali Qari, and I think he's correct in saying this, that you would be misguided, you would be sinful in this, but you're still Muslim.
Right.
I think that's the correct position.
Yes.
Okay. And to this, I would add something that the Mufti of Egypt, Muhammad Bakhit al-Muti'i, he died in 1935. He was an Egyptian, the chief Mufti of Egypt in the 1930s, 20s and 30s. And he has a really interesting discussion with these kind of young, really like kind of westernized Egyptians, wearing suits and stuff. And they're just saying, we shouldn't follow the Sunnah, we should follow custom and whatever the custom of our time is. And he's describing this interaction, and he's very merciful to them, right? He says, it's like some people, if they say they don't believe a hadith, it's not because they're not rejecting the Prophet. They love the Prophet. They love the Prophet very much. And what they're saying is, I don't feel like this is something he would say. So in some ways, their rejection is actually a love of the Prophet. And in that case, he's not like, his response isn't to say, you're a kafir or you're misguided or something like that. That's not the way to think, right? Yes. The way to think is, this person has love for the Prophet. That's why they want to be Muslim. So the answer isn't to kind of condemn them or drive them away or something. Yes. It's to try to help them understand better. And that's, I think, a very important thing to keep in mind, because a lot of, when you have discussions about this or you see debates about this, usually, sometimes it's non-Muslims, but usually it's people who are Muslim. They want to be Muslim. Like if you meet like Parvezi people from Pakistan, or people who are like Quran-only Muslims, they want to be Muslim. And they just see hadith and they don't understand how to deal with them.
Yes.
So the answer isn't to kind of say, well, you guys are misguided, or you guys aren't Muslim, or if you say this, then it's, this is the consequence. I think the most helpful thing to do is actually help them understand.
Good.
How, first of all, it's very important to tell them, listen, you have a problem with hadith, and your instinct is fine. Our religion doesn't say just believe whatever anyone tells you, right? Mm-hmm. You're supposed to hatu burhanakum in kuntum sadiqin, right? The Quran tells us we believe stuff when we have proof. When someone brings us revelation, when someone brings us evidence, that's why I'm Muslim. That's why I decided to become Muslim. It's like, listen, I'll believe stuff, but you got to give me evidence.
Yes.
And if you hear something that seems to contradict the Quran, that seems to contradict what you know about the Prophet, that seems to contradict reason, you have every right to be skeptical about this and to say, I don't think this is a hadith. The problem is when you refuse to have any discussion about this, or when you think you automatically know better than everybody else. So sometimes this is kind of like a know-it-all competition. You have two different know-it-alls, the kind of traditional Muslim, I know everything, you need to listen to me, and the modernist Muslim progressive, I know it all, you need to listen to me. I think what is really important in these discussions is that people have humility and compassion for the other. And this is funny because out of all the Facebook debates I've gotten in, all the Twitter wars, all the personal debates I've ever had on these issues, the only time I have ever changed someone's mind wasn't when I brought them evidence or when I gave the best argument. It was when I was just, I had to be, I thought I had the compassion thing on 12. I turned the dial up to 11. I was just so compassionate. I was like, I understand you think this. I understand, that was the only time I've ever had somebody change their mind. It had nothing to do with evidence or who's right or wrong. It had to do with being compassionate to why they thought something. And then we were able to reach one another.
Dr. Jonathan Brown, Jazakallah khair for your time today. It's been a fascinating discussion.
I loved it.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Please remember to subscribe to our social media and YouTube channels, and head over to our website thinkinmuslim.com to sign up to my weekly newsletter. Jazakallah khair.